The forgotten grave. The chill of the October air bit sharply against Casey's cheeks as she ventured further into the overgrown woods behind her grandfather's house. Stories of the old abandoned cemetery buried somewhere within these woods had circulated in her family for generations, often whispered at family gatherings with a mixture of reverence and fear. Today, curiosity had gotten the better of her, propelling her deeper into the thicket, away from the well-trodden paths and into the realm of twisted branches and shadows. As she pushed through a particularly thick bush, the scenery opened up to reveal a small clearing, untouched by human hands for what seemed like centuries. There, scattered like the forgotten memories of a bygone era, were the weathered stones of the cemetery. The gravestones were crooked, many nearly swallowed by the earth itself, their inscriptions eroded by time and neglect. One stone, however, stood out starkly against the muted grays and browns of the surrounding stones. It was unusually well preserved, the engravings deep and clear, as though shielded from the ravages of time. The name Elijah Morrow was chiseled into the granite, accompanied by a simple epitaph, "Do not forget me." The air around the stone was cooler, and Casey could swear she felt a faint whisper brush against her ear, echoing the plea of the epitaph. Drawn inexplicably to the grave, Casey found herself visiting the site every day after school, clearing away the encroaching vines and leaves with a care she had never known. With each visit, a sense of unease began to grow within her, an unshakable feeling that she was being watched. Shadows seemed to linger longer around her, and the wind carried murmurs that made her skin crawl. At home, her dreams were invaded by visions of Elijah Morrow. He appeared as a young man, not much older than herself, with a melancholic gaze that seemed to pierce through the veil of sleep. In her dreams, he spoke of loneliness and a deep unresolved sorrow, begging her not to leave him alone in the dark. Driven by a mix of fear and compassion, Casey began researching the history of the cemetery and its occupants. The local library held little information, just a few newspaper clippings about the town's founding families. Elijah was mentioned briefly, a young man who had disappeared without a trace in 1872, leaving behind a grieving family and a host of unanswered questions. No records existed of his body ever being found, yet his gravestone stood unmistakably in the forgotten cemetery. The obsession deepened as the line between reality and nightmare blurred. Shadows flitted at the edge of her vision, and whispers filled her ears whenever she neared the grave. The psychological torment twisted her perception, making her question what was real and what was a figment of her overwrought imagination. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of blood red and purple, Casey stood before Elijah's grave, the sense of connection stronger than ever. The air was thick with the scent of moss and decay, and as darkness enveloped the woods, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were no longer just murmurs, but clear words, calling her name, begging her to uncover the truth and set free the soul that had been bound to this desolate place for nearly a century and a half. "I will find the truth, Elijah. I promise," she whispered into the growing night, not fully understanding the magnitude of her words. The ground beneath her trembled slightly, as if in response, and a cold wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it a feeling of impending doom. As she turned to leave, a figure stood in the path, tall, shadowy, its features obscured by the darkness. Panic gripped her heart, but as the figure stepped into the waning light, she saw the sorrowful eyes of Elijah Morrow, looking at her not with malice, but an unbearable sadness that froze her to the spot. "Thank you for remembering me," he said, his voice a whisper of leaves against stone. Casey, caught between terror and a profound pity, could only nod as the figure slowly faded into the mist that had begun to rise with the night. She knew then that her life was irrevocably linked to this forgotten grave, and the journey to unravel the mystery of Elijah Morrow had only just begun. As the days shortened and the nights grew colder, Casey's visits to the cemetery became more frequent and urgent. The encounters with the spectral image of Elijah had shaken her, embedding a deep-rooted need to uncover the truth behind his mysterious existence and untimely disappearance. Each visit left her with more questions than answers. the whispers in the wind becoming a constant companion, urging her forward. Casey's research took her to the oldest inhabitants of the town, the elderly who still remembered the tales handed down through generations. She learned of a curse said to plague the Morrow family, a curse that began with Elijah and resulted in tragedy and loss for anyone who dared to unearth its origins. But instead of deterring her, each piece of folklore and whispered rumor only fueled her resolve. One crisp evening, under the pale glow of a full moon, Casey found an old leather-bound journal buried beneath the soil near Elijah's grave. Wiping away the dirt and age, she opened it to find it belonged to Elijah himself. The entries were sporadic, filled with beautiful sketches of the woods and the cemetery, along with Elijah's thoughts and fears. As she turned the pages, the reality of Elijah's loneliness and despair reached out across the centuries, pulling at her heartstrings. The final entry in the journal was dated the day before his reported disappearance. It spoke of a terrible revelation, a hidden truth about his family that he feared would bring doom to them all. The writing became erratic, almost frantic, ending with, "I must end this before it consumes us all." With trembling hands, Casey closed the journal. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly fitting together, forming a picture that was as horrifying as it was sad. Elijah had discovered something so dreadful that it drove him to disappear, perhaps to protect his family from the curse he believed was his legacy. That night, as Casey sat by the grave, the air turned icy and the whispers coalesced into a clear, palpable voice. It was Elijah, speaking directly to her, his voice tinged with sorrow and urgency. "You have to find the heart of the curse, Casey. It's the only way to free us both," he implored. Casey nodded, her mission clear. She would find the origin of the curse and break it, not just for Elijah, but for herself as well. The link that bound them was not just spiritual, it was as if their fates were intertwined by the very threads of time itself. The next weeks were spent combing through old records and artifacts, piecing together the history of the Morrow family. Casey discovered that the curse was tied to an ancient artifact, a dark obsidian mirror that Elijah had unearthed in the woods. The mirror, rumored to be a gateway to another realm, was said to hold a malevolent spirit that cursed the Morrows for its disturbance. With a newfound resolve, Casey set out to find the mirror, believing that destroying it would end the curse. Her search led her deeper into the woods, guided by an unseen force, until she stood before an old, dilapidated cabin hidden by overgrown vines and shadows. Inside, she found the mirror, as ominous and foreboding as described in the legends. Its surface was a swirling abyss, pulling at the edges of her sanity. As she lifted a rock to smash the mirror, the air thickened, and a dark figure emerged from the shadows, its eyes burning with a hatred that was almost palpable. Casey screamed, throwing the rock with all her might. The mirror shattered with a sound like the world ending, and the figure dissolved into a scream of rage and despair that echoed through the woods. As silence fell, Casey felt the air lighten, the oppressive weight of the curse lifting. She returned to the cemetery, where the gravestone of Elijah Morrow now lay cracked and moss-covered, as if it, too, had borne the burden of the curse. Standing there, she felt a gentle breeze, the whispers of thanks from those long bound by the darkness. She knew that her connection to this place would never fully sever, but the terror had ended. In its place was a deep, abiding peace, as if both she and Elijah had been set free from a prison of shadows and whispers. Casey left the cemetery as dawn broke, the first light of morning casting long shadows behind her, but the darkness that had followed her was gone, replaced by hope and a future unfettered by the curses of the past.
If you enjoyed this chilling story, let us know by smashing that like button. We upload new spine-tingling tales every week, so subscribe to our channel and hit that notification button so you never miss an episode. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback shapes our future uploads. Stay spooky, and we'll see you in the next video.